We've been doing crosses between plants or animals for that matter. We were only looking at one particular trait. That's called a monohybrid cross. Today though, we're going to start looking at dihybrid crosses, which is what we get if we're looking at two traits from the same plants that are being crossed, or animals for that matter as well. Okay, so we're going to look at example 7.4 and 7.5, and then I'm going to take some information that we get from one of those examples, and I'm going to take it a step further. So even if you understood example 7.4 and 7.5, hang in there or do some fast forwarding, and make sure that you watch the end of this so that you can see what happens when I do a more extensive cross with some of this information. All right, if I look at example 7.4, example 7.4 says a tall, white-flowered pea plant is heterozygous in the gene that determines height and homozygous in the gene that determines flower color. What are the possible allele combinations for the gametes produced by this plant? Well, first of all, we've got to figure out what the genotype is for this plant. So it's tall and white-flowered, and it's heterozygous in height. So heterozygous means they're the same or different? Yeah, it means that they're different. So for a tall plant, we know that tall is dominant. And so if it's heterozygous, then that means that's going to be a capital T and a little t. Then we know that it's white-flowered. Well, we also know that white-flowered is not dominant in pea plants, but rather it's recessive. And since it's recessive, it's got to be homozygous anyway, but they did help us out and go ahead and give us that information as well. So that's going to be two little f's. So overall, the genotype for this plant is big T, little f, little f. Now, it asks for what the possible allele combinations are for this particular plant. So what they're asking us is, after this these diploid cells go through meiosis, what kind of combinations is it possible for me to end up with? Because obviously on every single offspring it produces, it's got to give instructions for the tallness, it's got to give instructions for the flower color, but there's more than one possibility here. So what are the possible allele combinations? Well, the only possible allele that it can give for flower color is a little f. That's the only thing it has, so it cannot give anything else. But in height, it can give either a capital T for a tall plant or a little t for a short plant. So what that tells me then is that I can give a capital T, but it's got to be paired with a little f, or I can give a little t, but it will also be paired with a little f. Okay, so the possible allele combinations are capital T, little f, or little t, little f. Okay, those are the only possible combinations that I can get from those two. All right, so now let's look at example 7.5. A pea plant that is tall and purple flowered is homozygous in both corresponding genotypes. What are the possible genotypes and phenotypes along with their percentage chances for occurring when this pea plant is crossed with a short white-flowered pea plant? Okay, so a lot of words, a lot of information there, so let's break this down a little bit. Let's take the first pea plant first. The first pea plant is tall and purple flowered. Okay, now if you recall, tallness is dominant, purple flowers are dominant, and it says it's homozygous in both. Well, if it's homozygous, then that means it's got the same traits or the same allele for both of its possibilities. So for tallness, it's got to be a capital T, capital T. For purple flowers, it's going to have to be a capital F, capital F. Okay? That's, since they're homozygous in both, that's what its genotype is going to be. Now, what are the possible alleles that this plant can give to its offspring? Well, for a tall plant, the only thing it can give is a capital T. And so its possible alleles, possible allele combinations is what I really should say, possible allele combinations for the first plant, it's got to give a capital T, and the only other combination, it also has to give a capital F, so that's the only combination that it can possibly give, a capital T and a capital F. There's no other combination there. Nothing else that it can possibly give. Now, this is going to be crossed with a short white-flowered pea plant, okay? So if it's short, that means it's going to be little t. If it's white-flowered, then it's going to be little f. So what are the possible allele combinations for this plant? Well, the only possible allele combinations here is a little t and a little f. So therefore, when I cross these two plants, what's that going to give me? Well, the tall purple flowered pea plant can only give me a capital T and a capital F. The short white flowered plant can only give me a little t and a little f, and so therefore this is a really easy Punnett square to make, because my offspring then is going to have a capital T and a little t, because that's going to come, remember you get one allele from each parent, and it's going to have a capital F and a little f, because you're going to get the flower color from each parent as well. All of the offspring are going to have the same thing. The tall purple flowered pea plant can't give anything but the dominant allele. The short white flowered pea plant can't give anything but the recessive allele, and so therefore that means that all of the offspring are going to be heterozygous in both traits. So if I look at the genotype is going to be capital T, capital F, little f, and 100% of the offspring are going to have that particular genotype. What's the phenotype? So what does this plant look like? Is it a tall plant or a short plant? Well, it's got that tall allele, so it's going to be a tall plant. Is it going to have purple flowers or white flowers? Well, again, it's got the dominant allele, so it's going to have purple flowers. And 100% of the plants, I mean, they all have the same genotype, so they're also all going to have the same phenotype. They're all going to be tall, and they're all going to have purple flowers on them, okay? So that was a pretty easy one. But now let's look and see what happens if I self-pollinate the plant that I got up here. So I'm going to erase this bottom example so that I've got some more space. You know, just to go back and review what we did here, we said I've got a tall white flowered pea plant. It's heterozygous in height, homozygous in flower color, okay? So heterozygous means it carries both the tall and the short allele. Homozygous in flower color, it can only give me white alleles. And we said that for the possible combinations, it can be a capital T little f or a little t little f. And if I cross-pollinate this, then it's going to look like this. So the plant initially can give me either a capital T little f or a little t little f. So that's like saying the mom can give me this combination, or she can give me this combination. The dad, and of course we're self-pollinating, so it's the same plant. The dad can give me capital T little f or little t little f. Okay, so now in place of a 1 by 1 Punnett square, now I have a 2 by 2 Punnett square. So again, anytime that I'm going to put these together, you always want to put the same letter first. If you start with T's out here, you want to start with T's in the middle. You always want to put the capital letter first in a pair if there is going to be one. So here I've got 2 capital T's and 2 little f's. So that's what this offspring is going to have, 2 capital T's and 2 little f's. This offspring, capital T little t and 2 little f's. Okay, now let's go down here. Capital T little t and 2 little f's. And here I've got little t and 2 little f's. Okay, so I've got some different combinations here than I did before. So let's see what possible genotypes are. So my genotypes, I have a capital T, little f, little f. 1 out of 4 possibilities, okay? Then I have 2 that are capital T, little f, so that's 2 out of 4 possibilities. And then my last offspring was a little t, little f, and that's 1 out of 4 possibilities. Okay, so 25%, 50%, 25%. So those are the genotypes. What do my phenotypes look like? Okay, what's this? Well, they all have what color flowers? Well, all of them are going to have white flowers because that's the only possibility. There's 2 little f's in all of them. So they all have white flowers. Is this a tall plant or a short plant? Yeah, this one's tall. This one's tall. This one's short. Okay, so these 2 are tall and this one is short. So I have 3 plants that are tall with white flowers, and I have 1 plant that is short with white flowers. Okay, so 75%, because again I have 1 out of 4 and 2 out of 4, and so that's 3 out of 4. So I have 3 out of 4, or 75% of my offspring are going to be tall with white flowers, and then 1 out of 4, or 25%, is going to be short with white flowers. Okay, so your ratios here are going to be 3 to 1, and this is going to be a 1 to 2 to 1, just like we saw when we did an example like this before. Okay, the only difference here was that we did have 2 traits in place of just 1, but you'll see that the ratios turned out to be very similar in this one. Okay, so make sure that you understand that the first step in this is to say, okay, the first step is to figure out what the genotype is for the plant that I'm looking at. Then I've got to figure out what the allele combinations are. Then you're going to take those allele combinations and put them on the side of a Punnett square. This particular case, I cross-pollinated, so it was the same on both of them. If you have 2 different parents, then you're going to do this in 2 different processes where you're going to figure out the genotype for each parent. You're going to figure out the possible allele combinations for each parent, and then those allele combinations go on the top. And then again, if you had a second one, you would find the genotype, you would find the allele combinations, and then those would go on the side. All right. We will do one more example tomorrow, and we're going to do a much more complicated one. So try and get the hang of this one with these more simple examples today.